Hello and welcome to this session on how we can use adaptive components in Revit to address how we can create sloped railings and fences. My name is Chad Smith. I'm a consulting technical lead here at A2K Technologies. So just a quick look at the agenda for the session. First up, we'll have a quick introduction as to who A2K Technologies are, and then straight onto the content, giving you firstly an overview on what adaptive components are, the basics of creating an adaptive component, in this case specifically related to a railing or a fence, and then the methods for placing it into the project. So a quick introduction about A2K Technologies. Firstly, we're a leading solutions training and consulting and management firm specialising in design technology. We have a multi-million-dollar turnover and over 150 staff across Australia, New Zealand and China. We're Australia's largest Autodesk reseller and a platinum partner, and we have a range of highly knowledgeable and industry experienced support training, consulting and business development teams covering the likes of infrastructure, building, mining and manufacturing sectors. Obviously, as an Autodesk Platinum partner, we focus predominantly on Autodesk products, but as you can see here, we have a range of other products that can complement the Autodesk software. So let's jump in and have a look at the content for this session. Starting with the likes of the railing example first. Traditionally, when we place railings, they can be quite complicated when it comes to putting them on sloped surfaces. This is not only just very simple slopes, as you can see here with this first example that's already got the railing placed, but also even more so once we start getting into some very complex curved shapes, as you can see in the example on the left-hand side. As some of you would probably be already aware of, using the railing tool on the likes of sloped floor objects is impossible, because when we use the pick new host tool that is in the railing tool, you can't pick the sloped floor as something for that railing to host onto. You could go ahead and put a ramp object in which is sloped, and therefore the railing will attach to the ramp, but now you've got the issue of having a ramp that you need to hide in all the other views or possibly embed it into a phase. This kind of gets a little bit messy and is more of a workaround than an actual solution. And obviously, as I've already shown you just with this other sloped and curved floor over on the left-hand side here, you can't very well generate a ramp that does that kind of shape. So therefore, we really need to start thinking about other approaches. And fortunately, with the massing tools and adaptive components, and in particular in 2014, we've got some features for dividing paths and repeating objects that'll make this a lot easier. So firstly, just to give you an understanding of about how these adaptive components are going to help us in this situation. You can see over here in this already placed element that we have an individual railing segment. These railing segments are adaptive components. An adaptive component is something that adapts to its environment in which it's been placed. You can see here that this single object is actually repeated all the way up the edge of the floor itself. When we get up to the end of this railing run, we also have just a single post just to finish off the railing. Now, all of this wouldn't be possible without the use of masses as well. So what we can see here, just want to go ahead and turn on masses, that when I select this railing or these railing components are placed inside a mass object, and this mass object has additional forms in which these are repeated along. We'll go into this a little bit more detail when we place it over on this double slope over on the back side here. So to start with, let's have a look at making an adaptive component. This is going to be a very simple one, but it should give you enough information to get into the process of making some for yourself. An adaptive component is still a family, so we need to come up to the families and create a new one. Inside our family template list, we have a metric generic model adaptive family template. Let's open it up. Now, even though these are adaptive components, they can still have their category changed. So we go up to this family category and parameters button, and change it from generic models to whatever we need it to be, just like you would with a regular generic family. In this case, it's going to be a railing, so I'm going to select the railings category and hit OK. In order to start an adaptive component, we need to place what we call reference points. These reference points can be placed anywhere at this particular point in time. Remember, I said that an adaptive component adapts to the condition in which it's been placed in the project. So therefore, the placement of these 2 points are somewhat irrelevant to start with. Now, these points don't really do anything for us straight up, so what we need to do is we need to make them adaptive. Just take note here when we make them adaptive that they've got a numerical number placed over the top of them. These are the order in which the element is placed into the project. We've got a start post and an end point on this railing component, so therefore we start with point 1 when we click it into the project, and point 2 is the second and final point. Now, with adaptive components, we generate an underlying framework first. So I'm going to do this through the use of putting more points, and eventually when I get to it, reference lines. So starting with points, I want to place a point that sits somewhere over the top of these existing points and is also locked to that adaptive point. Now, the way that we do this, when we're running the point command, we can use the set work plane button here to go and pick the X, Y plane of that adaptive point. We can then go and place the point directly over the top. Let me go and set the work plane to this other adaptive point and do the same. Now what you'll notice, when I grab this point and drag it in a vertical direction, like so, when I move the adaptive point, you can see the other reference point that was placed over the top of it is connected to it in the same XY location. These new reference points that we've placed are going to simulate the top height of our railing object. But how high are those points? Let's have a look at one of them. When I select it, over in the properties on the left-hand side, we have an offset value. I'm going to set this to an initial point of 1000. Can do the same for the other side, like so. Let me just move them together a little bit closer so that I can get a little bit more context in terms of their actual size. Now, just like when we work with regular families, these points can also be tied into a family parameter, and you'll see that over in the properties palette on the left there. So using the associate button, I'm going to associate those points to a brand new parameter. We'll call it height. So now when we come up to the family types dialog box, we have a height value so that we can control the height of our railing. So this should start giving us some basic points to put our reference lines on top of. Coming up to the ribbon up here, selecting the reference line command. And I also need to make sure on the options bar that the 3D snapping option is ticked on. I can now go ahead and click the first adaptive point. We'll come up to the point above it, across and back down. Just hit escape. Just to make things a little bit crisper, I'm also going to thin lines as I'm working here. Just one more reference line has to go on, so selecting reference and line, making sure 3D snapping on the options bar is still ticked on. I'm going to place a point at the midpoint of that first vertical line, and then I'm going to come across to the midpoint of the second vertical line. Just hit escape to cancel. Now here's something interesting. When we come up to the family types and adjust the height from 1000 to 500, obviously those top reference points that we previously placed are going to lower down. But notice something else. The points that were placed at the midpoint of the vertical reference lines have also dropped down. There's some unique behaviors going on inside this adaptive component that you do not get in regular family editing. Allow me just to undo that for a moment. I'll redo it, and you can see the point that's at the midpoint of those vertical reference lines always remains halfway along that vertical line. Let's have a look at one of those points. You'll see over in the properties that we have a couple of specialized parameters that control that. The first one is the measurement type. It's called the normalized curve parameter. There's a range of other options that we can select there, but this particular normalized curve parameter works in conjunction with the normalized curve parameter property directly underneath it, which says 0.5, half. It needs to be halfway along that line. You'll see there, if I go and adjust that to say 0.75, then that point will be 3/4 of the way along that line. I'll just reset that back to 0.5. So you don't have to place any additional dimensions or constraints in order to control it. So I'm going to go test this back in the project, but before I do, these reference lines that we can see here at the moment won't be visible when I place it into the project. Reference lines are purely used as a reference, just like they would inside a regular family when you create one, and therefore aren't visible in the project. What are visible though are model lines. So I'm just going to select these lines for the moment and untick their is reference line parameter, basically converting them now into model lines. So let me just go ahead and Control Tab back to my project. I will edit this existing rail here. I'm just going to delete this out. I should probably go back and hit the load into project. We'll put that into the multi-slope railing. Okay, you can see there, without even placing it, it already has some kind of form to it. And I'm going to go and place it over the first point here and over the second point. Okay, now, it did actually get placed, but it's not displaying it correctly because there's another setting that we have to go and set. So I'm just going to delete that out for the moment and switch back to our family and have a closer look at our adaptive points at the base here. These adaptive points have some other properties that dictate how they're orientated when they're placed into a project. You'll notice here that the orientation is currently set to by host reference. There are some other options in there that do a variety of things, but the one I specifically want at the moment is this vertical on placement option. This will keep these points always vertical when they're placed into the project. This option is not too dissimilar from the always vertical option that you see in regular families. So let's now go load this back into the project, overwrite the existing one, and grab my component tool, and this time place it and place it. Okay, there are those two clicks, the first click and the second click. They relate back to our 2 points that we previously placed. Now I did say that they're called adaptive components, and you can see here when we drag one of them around that the entire frame updates accordingly. So allow me to convert these model lines back into reference lines, because that's what I previously wanted. Okay, I don't want those lines coming through. I want what I put onto them in terms of geometry to come through, not the model lines. Now, there are a variety of different techniques that you can use to attach geometry to this framework. The technique that I'm going to use is specific to how this one functions. I won't lie, I did have to try a few different techniques before I found the one that works specifically for this example. So what I need to do, I need to put a circular extrusion down the left, one across the top and one across the middle here. To do this, I'm going to place a reference circle. It's going to be at the base of this first line. Now, I can't just very well go and click and draw this circle. I need to make sure it's placed at the correct location, of which there are numerous locations in which to draw this. I'm going to use my Set Work Plane button, and you'll notice that using the Set Work Plane button is very important when you work with adaptive components. And I'm going to place it over the top here. And you can see here, just as I tab through the different options, I get to a point which is the end plane of the reference line. I'm going to click it. Let me zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to draw a circle which is 25 mil radius. I'm now going to do the same at the top up here. So using the set work plane, just tabbing until I get the horizontal, there it is there, and then draw 25 mil. Now, creating the extruded geometry is very similar to when you're working in just a general massing environment. We pick the 2D geometric shapes first, and then we use our create form up the top here. In this case, it will be a solid form, like so. Okay, allow me to go ahead and just do the same again for the other two extrusions along the horizontals. Just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to select this though and just do a temporary hide element on it to start with. Okay, so reference circle plane on the end, select draw. Oops, I should make sure that I've got circle selected first. Do that one more time. This one's going to be 15 mil radius. Do the same up the other end. Set work plane at the end, pick 15. While I'm here, and I've still got the reference circle still running, I'm going to do the other two ends of this line. So there, this will be 10, and back over the other side. Set, tab, select, and 10 mil. Selecting the geometry, create form, and the same again, select the geometry, which is that one, and create form. For the next steps, I'm now just going to select this geometry and also temporarily hide it. Because as we can see, when we go back to our example here, I've got a couple of little balls at the ends where the connections are. Now, for these balls, I'm going to make another adaptive component that I'm going to nest into this one. So I'm going to come up to the menu where we can generate a new family. This will be also an adaptive component. This one's fairly simple. We firstly place a point. Once again, it doesn't matter where we place it. We're going to select it, make it adaptive, on that point, we are going to draw, I'm going to make this a model circle, and this will have a 40 mil radius on it, and then we select it and create a form. Now there are two types of shapes that we can generate from a circle. We can make an extruded shape similar to a cylinder, or we can make a sphere. We simply select which icon we would like to generate. So there it is. Let's load this into our project, being the family that we're working on. And we can place this adaptive component on top of another point inside this adaptive component. So let's go ahead and place it over the top here and here. Let's now reset our temporary hide isolate to get our geometry back. And like what we do when we create other families, we should flex the model. So just grabbing one of these points, just dragging around, you can see there it's flexing, which is great. And it's typically a good idea just to adjust the height as well. So you can see there that we can offset it, almost as though we're simulating it going onto this sloped surface. So let's go ahead and load this back into our multi-slope railing. Let's overwrite the existing one. Okay. Let's just ignore this other mass for the moment, and let's come over to this one over here that doesn't yet have a railing placed on it. Just double checking, yes, that I am still showing my mass. This floor was originally generated by a surface that was inside a mass. I still have that mass in place, which I'm going to edit. Just ignore that void for the moment. In fact, I might just go ahead and hide it. That just gave me that curve that you can see there in plan. Now this mass object, along the curved edge that you can see, I'm going to use my tab key to go and tab to the edge line and then select it. When it's selected, we get this interesting option up here called divide path. The divide path will divide that edge up into a layout of my specific settings. I'm going to change it from fixed number to maximum distance and set that maximum distance to 2 meters. Now, an adaptive component in this case needs to be placed inside the mass in order to recognize that divided edge that we've just generated. Now, I'm going to go and grab my adaptive component. Now, since I was in that other mass when I was loading it in before and then I cancelled the mass, the component has actually been unloaded from the project. So I'm just going to go back to my adaptive component and hit the load in project. Let's get it back in again. Okay, let's just zoom into this first point, and we need to click on that first node and then click on the second node. So that gets a single instance in. Now, we could sit here and we could place the second and the third and so on, but there's a quicker way we can finish this process. We select that first instance of the railing, that first segment, and then up on the ribbon we have this feature up here called repeat. It will repeat this component when I select it, as I've just done, across all of the points along the edge inside the mass. Obviously, we need to put that final post in. So allow me to go and grab that last component. In this case here, it's my post. Let's place it on the end. And we can now hit the finish button and finally turn our mass off. Okay, so there we have it. You can see there a fairly simple railing, but placed in a way that would otherwise be quite complex to do, or even impossible using regular methods such as a railing tool. So let's go and have a look at the sloped fence example. Once again, something that is traditionally been quite difficult to do is to put a fence along the slope of a terrain on a site. This example uses very similar methods to what I did with the post, but its placement is, or I should say its framework was set up just a little bit differently. Firstly, let's make sure that the mass is visible. And you can see here I've simply outlined the site boundary lines with a mass that's been extruded up. That mass has to be extruded far enough so that it sits above the entire site where the fence needs to go. I'm going to select the mass and edit it in place. You'll notice here on this front face that I've already gone and modeled in a reference line modeled as a spline, and the way that I did this was using the reference spline tool. And you can see here when I go and put my cursor over the face, it actually highlights the face. I can start down on the edge, and you can see here as I place this spline in, the spline is stuck to the face of that mass object. So let me just delete that for the moment and focus in on the one that I've already drawn. Same method again now. We pick the spline object, we use the divide path tool. I'm going to set this also to be a maximum distance of 2 meters. And you can see here that spline now has, it's shown quite small, those little points, but these points are now also in addition to the points that are on the spline, so you can refine the spline afterwards if need be. Now we could get a little bit confused as to what are the points for the divided part and what are the points for the spline. So I'm going to go into my visibility graphic overrides and underneath annotation categories, going down to the reference section, You can see here we have reference points which I'm going to turn off. Now it's just the same process as what we did in the railing example. We grab our adaptive component. This time it's a fence with a panel post. I'm going to place it on the first node, the second node, picking it, and then using that same repeat tool up on the ribbon. Let's give it a moment to calculate. There we have it. Allow me to finish the mass and then hide the mass through the use of this Show Mass by View Settings option again. And there we have it. So I hope that has provided some additional information that might help you to start thinking maybe a little bit outside the box and get introduced to the massing and in particular the adaptive component family editing environment in order to achieve more complex outcomes through the use of what are essentially fairly simple tools.